The signal that shouldn't exist. The vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly, silent and dark, until a sudden signal broke the stillness. It was weak, flickering, and ancient, older than any known civilization. It pulsed like a heartbeat, repeating itself over and over, a desperate call for help. The United Galactic Federation's UGF, Deep Space Monitoring Station, Outpost Echo 9, picked up the distress signal first. At first, the officers thought it was just static, a glitch in their system. But when the signal repeated in a clear pattern, alarms blared across the station. Lieutenant Sarah Connors, the communication officer, frowned as she studied the data. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered, her fingers flying over the holographic controls. Commander Jonas Mercer, a seasoned officer with years of deep space experience, walked up behind her. "What is it?" he asked. Sarah turned to him, her face pale. "Sir, this distress signal is at least 10,000 years old." The command center fell silent. Officers exchanged uneasy glances. A distress signal that old meant only one thing. Whoever had sent it was long dead. Mercer narrowed his eyes. "Origin." Sarah hesitated before answering. "It's coming from Sector Omega 57. Now, the silence turned into pure dread. Omega 57 was a dead zone, a sector of space marked as forbidden in every galactic map. No one traveled there, not because of natural dangers, but because nothing ever returned. Hundreds of ships had vanished in that region, and no one knew why. "This has to be a mistake," one officer said. "No one lives there. No one has for thousands of years." Sarah shook her head. "The signal is real, Commander, and it's coming from a ship." Mercer's grip tightened around the console. He had heard the stories, the rumors about ships disappearing in Omega 57. Some said it was haunted. Others believed it was the remains of a forgotten war. But this, a distress call from a ship that shouldn't exist. The UGF didn't believe in ghosts, but they did believe in answers. Within the hour, a small expedition fleet was assembled. 3 ships, led by Captain Elias Carter, were ordered to investigate. If there were survivors, no matter how unlikely, they would be rescued. If not, they would at least find out what was happening in the darkest part of the galaxy. Captain Elias Carter stood on the bridge of the U.S. Dauntless, staring at the glowing coordinates on the screen. His crew was nervous, but they were professionals. They had explored dangerous regions before, but something about this mission felt wrong. Approaching Omega 57, his navigator reported. The moment the fleet entered the dead zone, every ship's systems glitched. Lights flickered, screens displayed static, and for a brief moment, all communications dropped to silence. Then, just as suddenly, everything went back to normal. Systems stabilized. The engineer announced, "I don't know what caused that, but it wasn't natural." Elias nodded, but his gut told him this was only the beginning. Keep scanning for the source of the distress signal. Minutes later, the U.S. Valkyrie, one of the escort ships, sent a transmission. "Captain, we have visual on the ship." Elias turned to his view screen. His breath caught. Drifting in the middle of the dead zone was a massive ancient ship. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. The hull was dark, scared by time, yet somehow intact. Strange symbols, unreadable and shifting, covered its surface like old scars. "That's the source of the signal?" Elias asked. Sarah, who had joined the mission to analyze the signal, nodded. "Yes, it's still broadcasting, but something is odd." "What?" Sarah hesitated. "The message is changing. Every time it repeats, the voice is different." Elias frowned. "Different how?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. First it was human, then something else. As the fleet moved closer, sensors detected something disturbing. "There's no life on board," one officer reported. Elias exhaled. That should have been good news, but it wasn't. Because if no one was on the ship, who was sending the distress signal? The U.S. Valkyrie inched closer to scan the ship. Suddenly, without warning, their screens flashed red. Energy spike detected, the helmsman shouted. A surge of unknown energy blasted from the ancient ship, hitting the U.S. Valkyrie head-on. The ship vanished. 1 second it was there, the next, gone. Elias stood frozen. Valkyrie, respond. Do you copy? Static. The remaining 2 ships hovered in stunned silence. One of their own had disappeared without a trace, as if swallowed by the void itself. A shiver ran down Elias' spine. Sarah, is the distress signal still playing? Sarah checked her instruments. Her face turned pale. Captain, the signal just changed again. Elias turned toward the view screen. The ancient ship loomed before them, silent, waiting. The distress signal played once more. But now, it wasn't a plea for help. It was a warning. Turn back, before it's too late. The forbidden sector. The moment the U.S. Valkyrie vanished, a heavy silence fell over the fleet. It was as if the entire universe held its breath. 1 second, the ship had been there, solid, real. And the next, it was gone. No explosion, no debris. Just emptiness. Captain Elias Carter clenched his fists, his heartbeat pounding like war drums in his ears. Valkyrie, do you read me? Static. A creeping dread slithered through the bridge. Where did the ship go? Commander Sarah Connors stared at her console, fingers trembling. Captain, the distress signal just changed again. Elias turned to her, his jaw tightening. How? Sarah swallowed hard. Before, it was a plea for help. But now, she hesitated, then whispered, it's warning us. A fresh wave of unease swept through the crew. The words echoed through the speakers, distorted, shifting between voices, some human, some alien, some indescribable. Leave. Before, take ease, you two. Elias exhaled sharply. Get me a full scan of the area. His science officer, Dr. Vexcor, an alien xenohistorian, was already analyzing the readings. His reptilian eyes widened. Captain, something is wrong with space here. What do you mean? Vexcor's fingers danced over the controls, pulling up an eerie visual of the sector. This region is not just empty. It is broken. Space itself is unstable. The hologram showed faint distortions, places where reality itself seemed to ripple, like water disturbed by an unseen force. This is why ships vanish, Vexcor continued. They don't explode. They don't crash. They are erased. The bridge remained deathly silent. Then the Dauntless shuddered. Lights flickered. A deep hum vibrated through the ship's hull, like a vast unseen presence brushing against them. Captain, the navigator called out. Something is. The ship's comms screeched, a sound so sharp and unnatural that the entire crew clutched their ears in pain. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped, and a new voice spoke over the comms. A familiar voice. This is Captain Reynolds of the U.S. Valkyrie. Please, we're still here. Don't leave us. Every hair on Elias' body stood on end. Captain Reynolds was calling for help. The only problem. He had vanished 10 minutes ago. To be continued in Part 3. The Ghost Ship. The voice of Captain Reynolds crackled through the comms. It was faint, distant, like a whisper carried through an endless void. We're still here. Don't leave us. Captain Elias Carter felt his blood run cold. Reynolds had vanished 10 minutes ago, along with the U.S. Valkyrie. There had been no wreckage, no explosion, just an empty void where the ship had once been. And yet, he was calling for help. Sarah Connors, still pale from the distress signal's shifting voices, hesitated before speaking. Captain, the signal isn't coming from a ship. Elias turned sharply. What? Sarah adjusted her instruments, her voice barely above a whisper. It's coming from everywhere. The U.S. Dauntless and its remaining escort, the U.S. remnant, drifted closer to the derelict vessel, the ancient ship that had sent the original distress call. It loomed ahead, massive and lifeless, its hull covered in strange, unreadable markings that seemed to shift when looked at too long. Elias exhaled, staring at the silent behemoth before them. Launched the drones. 2 small probe drones shot forward, gliding toward the unknown ship. The moment they crossed its boundary, their signal cut out. No explosion, no interference, just nothing. Elias clenched his jaw. We're going in. Inside the nightmare. A small team of 6 boarded the derelict ship through an airlock that had mysteriously opened on its own. The moment they stepped inside, their helmet comms crackled with faint whispers, words that weren't in any known language. The darkness inside wasn't natural. It swallowed their flashlights like an endless abyss. "This place," whispered Dr. Vexcor, scanning the walls with his instruments. "It's ancient, older than any known civilization." Elias pressed forward, his boots echoing eerily. The walls of the ship were smooth yet organic, as if the vessel had once been alive. Symbols lined the corridors, pulsing with faint, unnatural light. Then they saw it. The skeletons. Lining the walls, humanoid remains were fused into the metal, their mouths open in eternal screams. Their bones were aged beyond recognition, thousands of years old, yet their skulls were human. Sarah gasped, stepping back. That's impossible. Humans weren't in space 10,000 years ago. A deep, unnatural hum resonated through the ship, shaking the floor beneath them. Then the whispers stopped, and something else started breathing. From the darkness ahead, a shadow moved. It wasn't human. It wasn't alien. It was wrong. And it was waiting for them. Inside the nightmare, the air inside the ancient ship was thick, heavy with something unseen. It was not dust, not decay, something else, something alive. Captain Elias Carter could feel it pressing against his armor, crawling under his skin like invisible fingers. The walls, lined with symbols that shifted when looked at, seemed to breathe in the dim glow of the team's helmet lights. Then the sound came, a deep, guttural breathing. Slow, measured, not human. Elias raised his rifle. Eyes up. We are not alone. Sarah Connors, gripping her scanner with trembling hands, whispered, "I'm picking up something. But it's everywhere. It's like the ship itself is." A scream tore through their comms. It wasn't static. It wasn't interference. It was Captain Reynolds. "Help. We're still here. Please." Then, silence. Elias' grip tightened on his weapon. The U.S. Valkyrie had disappeared without a trace. How was Reynolds still broadcasting? Dr. Vexcor, his reptilian eyes scanning the alien script, suddenly hissed in horror. "This ship, it's not a ship." Elias turned sharply. "What do you mean?" Vexcor ran his clawed fingers over the shifting symbols. "This is not a distress call. It never was." He looked up, his voice filled with dread. "This is a prison." A cold chill spread through Elias' body. A prison? For what? Then the shadows moved. Something wakes up. The corridor behind them warped, stretching like flesh as the lights flickered. The breathing sound grew louder, turning into a low growl. Sarah gasped, stepping back. "Captain, something is coming." Then, from the darkness ahead, they saw it. A shape, wrong, shifting, forming and reforming like liquid shadow. It had no face, yet 1,000 watching eyes seemed to stare through them. The whispers started again, not through their comms, inside their minds. "You should not have come." The temperature dropped. Their breath turned to mist inside their helmets. Weapons shook in their hands. Elias fought to stay calm. Back to the ship. Now, they turned, but the path they came from was gone. The ship was sealing them in. The creature lurched forward, stretching, unraveling, its formless limbs reaching for them. Sarah screamed. Vexcor whispered a desperate prayer in his native tongue. And then, the lights died completely. Darkness swallowed them whole. The entity awakens. Total darkness. The team's helmet lights flickered, barely cutting through the thick black void around them. The air inside the ship felt wrong, heavy with something unseen. A low humming sound vibrated through the walls, like a distant heartbeat. Then, the whispers returned. "We see you." Elias Carter gritted his teeth. "Stay together. No one moves alone." Sarah Connor's breathing was sharp in the comms. "Captain, we're trapped." The corridor they had come from was gone. The walls had shifted, warping like liquid metal. It was as if the ship was alive. Dr. Vexcor raised his scanner, his reptilian eyes widening in terror. "Captain, we are not inside a ship." Elias turned sharply. "Then what are we inside?" Vexcor's voice was barely a whisper. "A body." A cold chill spread through Elias' bones. The symbols on the walls weren't just markings. They were veins. The shifting corridors weren't metal. They were flesh. And the thing they were standing inside was waking up. The horror reveals itself. A deep rumble shook the ground beneath them. The walls quivered, pulsing as if a heartbeat was growing stronger. Then, ahead of them, the shadows moved. Something stirred in the darkness, a formless shape shifting like smoke trapped in water. It had no solid form, yet it was there, watching them. Sarah gasped. "What is that?" The whispers turned into a chorus of voices, some human, some alien, some unknown. "You are the first in thousands of years to enter, and you will never leave." A tendril of pure darkness shot forward. Elias barely pulled Sarah out of the way before it slammed into the floor, melting through the metal like acid. The entity laughed, a sound that didn't come from a mouth but from everywhere at once. Vexcor shouted, "It's playing with us. We need tow." Another tendril shot out, wrapping around one of the crew members. The man screamed as his body was dragged into the darkness. His armor collapsed into dust before he could even reach the walls. He didn't die. He was erased. Sarah choked back a sob. "We can't fight this." The whispers grew louder. "You were never meant to be here. But now, you are part of us." The team opened fire, bullets and plasma rounds cutting through the dark mass, but it was useless. Their weapons phased through it, hitting nothing. Elias made a split-second decision. "We need to move. Now." A desperate escape. The walls shifted again, but this time, an exit appeared, a corridor leading deeper into the ship. A trap. Maybe. But staying here meant certain death. Elias made the call. "Run." They sprinted down the corridor, the whispers chasing them. The shadows lunged, tendrils snapping inches away from their heads. One by one, the symbols on the walls dimmed, as if the entity was absorbing power from the ship itself. Then, the most terrifying realization hit Elias. The distress signal, the one that had lured them here, was to call for help. It was a warning to stay away. And they had ignored it. The corridor twisted, shifting into a massive chamber. And, at its center, a monstrous shape hung suspended in the air, bound by chains of light. It wasn't fully awake. Not yet. And if it did, the entire galaxy would suffer. Elias clenched his jaw. They had one chance to stop it, or die trying. A horror unleashed. The chamber stretched endlessly, the walls pulsing like a living thing. The team skidded to a halt, their breath ragged inside their helmets. Suspended in the air before them was the source of the nightmare. A colossal, formless entity, its body made of shifting darkness and pulsing energy, bound in chains of ancient light. It was not awake, yet. Elias Carter could feel its presence pressing against his mind, a force so overwhelming that his vision blurred. Sarah Connors clutched her head. It's speaking." Elias barely managed to whisper, "What is it saying?" Sarah's voice trembled. "It wants to be free." The truth revealed. Dr. Vexcor scanned the glowing symbols around the chamber. His reptilian eyes darted from one life to another, realization dawning. These aren't just chains. They're a seal. Elias turned to him. A seal. Vexcor swallowed hard. This entity, it was imprisoned here thousands of years ago. He pointed to the writing. The distress signal was not from a lost ship. It was a warning, a desperate plea to keep this thing locked away. The whispers grew louder, turning into a chorus of pleading voices echoing across the chamber. Release us. Free us. We will grant you power beyond imagination. Sarah's eyes widened. Wait, it's using their voices. Elias stiffened. Whose voices? Sarah's voice barely escaped her lips. The missing ships. Elias felt a cold weight in his chest. Every ship that had ever disappeared in Omega 57. Every crew. Every soul. They were still here. Trapped. Absorbed. And now, the entity wanted them to. The chains began to break. The ground shook. The glowing chains crackled, flickering, their light dimming as the entity's power grew. The whispers turned to laughter. Vexcor stumbled back. It's breaking free. We have to. A sudden shockwave blasted through the chamber, sending the team sprawling. The walls melted into darkness, tendrils of pure void stretching out. One of the crew, Lieutenant Rains, was too slow. A shadow wrapped around his body, and he screamed as his form twisted, his skin melting into the void. His voice joined the others. Sarah sobbed. We can't fight this. We need to go. Elias' mind raced. Running wouldn't be enough. If this thing escaped, it wouldn't just destroy them. It would consume the entire galaxy. There was only one option. He turned to Vexcor. Can we overload the seal? Vexcor hesitated. Yes, but at a cost. Elias gritted his teeth. What cost? Vexcor met his gaze. Someone has to stay behind. The ultimate choice. Elias felt the weight of those words settle on him. The entity's laughter grew. The chains cracked, shadows rising like an unstoppable tide. Sarah grabbed his arm. There has to be another way. But there wasn't. He knew it. They all knew it. Elias exhaled, steadying himself. Sarah, get the team back to the ship. Sarah's eyes widened. No, no way, I'm not. Elias grabbed her shoulders. That's an order. Sarah's breath hitched, tears welled in her eyes. Behind them, the entity lunged, its form warping, twisting, its prison failing. There was no time. Elias turned to Vexcor. Tell me what to do. Vexcor hesitated for only a second before slamming his hand onto the control panel. The glyphs flared, burning bright, and Elias felt power surge through the chamber. The entity screamed. The prison's final failsafe was activating. Elias turned back to his team, his family, one last time. Go. Now. Sarah clenched her fists, fighting back sobs, but she obeyed. One by one, the team ran. Elias stood alone. The seal flared, blinding, all-consuming light swallowing the darkness. The last thing Elias heard before the void took him was Sarah's broken voice over the comms. Goodbye, Captain. The final sacrifice. Blinding light erupted through the chamber as the ancient seal reactivated, its power surging like a dying star's final breath. Elias Carter stood in the center, his body bathed in the golden glow of the glyphs. The entity screamed, its formless shape thrashing, tendrils of pure darkness trying to escape before the chains of light tightened once more. The walls trembled, the air vibrated. The seal was working. But so was the cost. Elias could feel it, the energy pulling at him, draining him, anchoring his very essence to the ancient mechanism. He was becoming part of the prison itself, escape from the abyss. Sarah Connors sprinted through the shifting corridors, her heart hammering against her ribs. The whispers were fading behind her, drowned by the blinding pulse of the seal's power. Captain, she screamed into her comms. You have to move. The ship's systems are detecting a collapse. This whole place is coming down. Static. Then, Elias' voice. Calm. Steady. That's the point, Sarah. Sarah's breath caught. No. No, we can find another way. You can still. There is no other way. Asterisk, asterisk, his voice was soft now, but there was no fear. No hesitation, asterisk, asterisk. If this thing escapes, it won't stop. You know that. Sarah clenched her fists, tears welling in her eyes. I can't just leave you. A faint chuckle came through the comms. You have to. That's an order, Lieutenant. Sarah choked on a sob as she reached the docking bay. The team was already inside the U.S. Dauntless, preparing for launch. She turned back one last time, looking at the glowing inferno consuming the corridor behind her. Elias Carter, her captain, her friend, was gone. But he had won. She forced herself to move, to run. The ship's doors slammed shut behind her, and within seconds, the Dauntless blasted away from the collapsing behemoth. The end of the nightmare. From the bridge of the Dauntless, Sarah and her team watched in silence as the ancient ship, no, the prison, began to fold in on itself. The glowing glyphs burned brighter, sealing the nightmare away once more. And then, it imploded. A silent flash of golden light, a shockwave of energy. And then, nothing. Omega 57 was empty once more. The prison remained, hidden, forgotten, as it was meant to be. Sarah closed her eyes, pressing her hand against the cold glass of the viewport. He was really gone, but his sacrifice had saved the galaxy. The final message. Hours later, the crew sat in silence, still processing what had happened. The comms remained eerily quiet. Then, a notification blinked on Sarah's console. A final transmission. From Elias Carter. Her hands trembled as she opened the file. His voice was clear, strong, alive. If you're hearing this, it means I did my job. A pause. Some things in this universe should never be uncovered. Some doors should never be opened. Another pause. Then, tell them I went down fighting. The message ended. Sarah wiped away a tear and straightened. She turned to the crew, her voice steady. Set course for home. The Dauntless turned toward the stars, leaving the forbidden sector behind. And as they vanished into the void, Omega 57 returned to silence, waiting, hiding, because some things should never be disturbed, and some nightmares are never truly over. END.